to annotate for. So here, the word choice is what makes these two paragraphs stand out, the choice of using those second person pronouns over and over and over. Now, you is used more often, or is used later on in the piece, but not as densely as in those two paragraphs. In the next set, we've got here, 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 here. You do have 5 in that one sentence, so that's pretty heavy. But you've got, I think, something like 14 or 15 just in the first 2 paragraphs. Also in this piece, we get an idea of what her purpose is, and that is developed more throughout. But the really interesting thing about the movement of the piece is where we can see that she's acknowledging that she encouraged him to do something he didn't want to do, and she's reassuring him that she has his best interests at heart. If I had thought your reluctance arose from proper deliberation, so if we think about what reluctance is, that's not wanting to do something. So if she thought he didn't want to go on this second trip to France because he had thought about it enough, or if she thought he didn't want to go because he was capable of judging what was most for his own good, she would not have urged him to accompany his father on the trip when he appeared so averse to the voyage. So it's clear that he didn't want to go, but she told him she wanted to go anyway. It doesn't say she forced him to go. It says, you, however, readily submitted to my advice. So he evidently agreed with her eventually, grudgingly. And she's saying she hopes he won't regret going. So lament is kind of, being sad about something or regretting something. And then she kind of starts to build him back up. Your knowledge of the language must give you greater advantages now than you could have reaped whilst ignorant of it. So it looks like maybe on his first trip to France, he didn't know French, so maybe he didn't have a very good time on that trip and didn't want to go back. But she's reassuring him that he will get something out of this trip. Then we have a shift. In line 16, she moves from directly talking to him, you this, you that, and she tells a little bit of a story. Some author that I've met with compares a judicious traveler to a river that increases its stream the further it flows from its source, or to certain springs which, running through rich veins of minerals, improve their qualities as they pass along. So she's telling him about a metaphor, and remember that literary devices are items that we want to annotate. So I've got that highlighted and I've marked that it's a metaphor because she takes this metaphor and she extends it into her hopes for him for this trip to France. She says, nothing is wanting with you but attention, diligence, and steady application. Nature has not been deficient. So these are qualities that he has. So I've got this highlighted in the same green as I do up here, because when she's talking about the river, she's saying that running through the minerals improves the qualities that the rivers already have. So she's basically, she's saying that she knows someone who made this metaphor up and she's applying the metaphor to him. So the qualities that he needs to build up are attention, diligence, and steady application. Nature has not been deficient. So that means he already has these qualities. He just needs to build them up more. And he will do this in his travels, as this author told her. So then in the next paragraph, she moves on. She says, these are times in which a genius would wish to live. It is not in the still calm of life or the repose of a Pacific station that great characters are formed. And this may remind you of the adversity argument prompt that we covered when she says, because basically she's saying that adversity builds character. So then she says, or she asks rather, would Cicero have shown so distinguished an orator if he had not been roused, kindled, and inflamed by the tyranny of Catiline, Verres, and Mark Antony? So this is a rhetorical question because the answer is implied. The implication is no, he would not have shown so distinguished an orator if he had not gone through these things. So that rhetorical question, that is a syntax choice. So if we're thinking about annotating for those slid top categories of rhetorical choices, that's one we might mark. So what she's implying there is that you have to go through some hard times in order to build yourself up, which again connects back to the flowing river. You've got to build yourself up. So sometimes it's just experiences build you, and then she's moving into more intense, sometimes even negative experiences build you up. And then on down, great necessities call out great virtues. If we think of virtues as being like qualities, we see that same idea being repeated. And remember, something that we need to annotate for would be repetition of ideas. So I'm going to go ahead and make a little note here that just says, oops, I'm not going to do that. I just want to type. There we go. Oh, I see where it did that. Okay, so I'm going to say repetition of the idea of building qualities slash virtues. And I'll just move that over to the side a little bit. Don't quite have space for it. Delete that one. Okay. And here she says those qualities which would otherwise lie dormant wake into life and form the character of the hero and the statesman. And that's almost verbatim what the adversity prompt says. This is an idea that we're used to hearing. Okay, so the other thing that's happening here, she says, it is your lot, my son, to be an eyewitness of these calamities in your own native land. And those calamities are war, tyranny, and desolation. And then she talks about invaded liberties. So here she's making a reference, I've already noted that, a reference to the Revolution, the American Revolution. This is before John Adams becomes president, and certainly before John Quincy Adams becomes president. But her reference to the difficulties in America at the time is what she's referencing there. Then in the last two paragraphs, the language changes. So here I have marked some shifts because we are changing into more positive language. It's all negative, or almost all negative in this one, and about how positives can come out of negative. So you've got, tyranny and the scourges of the Almighty, desolation, war. And then down here, she's saying you have a parent who's taken so large and active a share in this contest. I don't think I meant to highlight that. But anyway, we've got trust, satisfaction, honored, important, regard to truth, pleasing hopes, justice, fortitude, virtue. So all of this is what she hopes will result from what she's listed before. So the important thing to notice here is where we see patterns. So I think I've noted where we see some differences. So in the first section here, these first two paragraphs, we've got the direct message to her where she's, or to her son, where she's being acknowledging and reassuring. That's where she's telling him that she, wouldn't have made him do this thing if she thought that he had really thought about it closely enough. And then the second piece, she's talking about how you build character when you go through adversity. And that continues from line 16 all the way through line 49. So we've got that second chunk is a little bit bigger, than the first chunk. But we can pretty clearly see that shift in focus from his personal feelings on it and her reassuring him that she's got his best interests at heart, and her talking about, why it's good to experience adversity. And then in the end, we've got this shift to all this positive language, all this here is the good that will come out of what you have been experiencing. And that's here in these last two paragraphs. Okay, so we basically got, let's see, will it let me write on this? Pick a different color. Make that big. Okay. So we've got our first section here, first chunk, and here we've got our second chunk. And then we've got the third chunk down here at the bottom. And this chunking is important because that correlates to how this translates into writing. So we'll start with an introduction, just like we do with pretty much any type of writing. And then our body paragraphs are going to be divided up according to these different chunks. So with this piece, I'd have 3 body paragraphs because I have 3 distinct movements in the text. So I've divided it into 3 chunks. Okay, so based on your annotations, what I'm going to ask you to do next is fill out this handout. And you can do this based on any of the parts of the text, any of those 3 chunks that we divided it into. But I want you to make some observations about these different rhetorical choices. So you're going to look at what rhetorical choices Abigail Adams made about syntax, literary devices, imagery, diction, detail, tone, organization, and point of view. And some of those you'll have more observations and more examples than others. So this you're going to do individually. You're going to analyze those rhetorical choices. So first, giving the examples, and you can quote it, you can paraphrase it, or you can summarize it, but I do want you to write in some words here, not just line numbers. And then I want you to talk to me about why the author made that choice. How did Abigail Adams hope to appeal to John Quincy Adams? Complete sentences are going to be necessary here. So do make sure you fill that out completely. Mr. Perry will check to make sure that you have that filled out, and then he will give you the rhetorical precis handout, and you will work on that. So this is to help you organize your thoughts, and then the next thing you do is going to be, if I can find it, to help you write an introduction. So when we write a rhetorical precis is basically the format of an introduction for a rhetorical analysis, and everything is explained on this handout.